right. Welcome back, everybody. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Sylvester Inspires Belief Cast. And I'm so excited once again to have an amazing guest. It's Julie Cluff. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day. Before we get into Julie's story, I need to thank our sponsor, Veracity Networks, and my good friend Drew Peterson for his support in that. And it's been so wonderful because it's really helped get the word out, and we're trending and we're booming. So thank you, listeners. And you're going to want to share this story as well, because this is going to be, at times tear jerking, but also inspiring at the same time and helping others that might be struggling. So excited. So a little bit about Julie. She's a full-time entrepreneur. She's also a podcaster. She's a hope giver. She calls herself that, a life coach, and a grief recovery specialist, which we'll get more into. Julie had lost 2 children in a car accident on Mother's Day of all days, and we're going to get into that. She also lost a brother to suicide when she was younger, which we'll talk to as well. And again, it's just always fascinates me, these people that I've had on my podcast, and just what they've been through and how they've overcome it. And it's so cool to see, Julie, that you have taken this tragic event and some of these other tragedies and turned it into helping yourself, but also giving back and helping other people. So I'm excited to hear that whole story. You have 6 children total, is that correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yes, and you're married, and his name is?
Ron.
So shout out to Ron. How you doing, Ron? Anyway, so let's get into it. So give us a little background. Where did you grow up, and a little bit about your family?
Yeah, I grew up in Clearwater, Florida, and it was a pretty idealistic childhood, living near the beach, and
right.
Yeah, it was a beautiful place to be. I'm actually 3rd generation Floridian, and my children are 4th generation. So we'd been in Florida for a long time. My mom was from northern Florida. My dad was from the east coast of Florida, and I grew up in Clearwater on the west coast of Florida.
West Coast, gotcha. Yeah. Water's warm, I'm assuming, down there?
Water is so warm. In fact, I have to tell you a funny story. When I went from Florida to BYU to go to school, Brigham Young University, and when I got out there, my second year, I was in the apartment complex that had a pool, and I went out to go get in the pool. It was August, and I thought, this will be fun. And I saw these people sitting on the sidelines, and I went up to the pool like I always do, and I just jumped in, and I came up going,
yeah,
I was
right.
Like, I had no idea. Like, I was from Florida. Pools are always warm.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, here they're always cold.
They're always cold.
They don't seem cold to us if you've been here a while, because they're just used to it. But the reason why I bring that up is I was in Miami for a development retreat for some training, and I remember I was expecting the ocean to be cold, and I was like, boy, this is warm.
It is so warm.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was like a lot different from the Pacific coast, right?
Yeah. I've lived in the South most of my life. I've been in Utah for 3.5 years, for 3.5 years. So
tell us a little bit about growing up, what life looked like for you, and, some of the things that you learned, and maybe some of the things you had gone through as well.
Well, I'm the oldest, so that explains a lot right there. I'm the oldest of 4. I had twin brothers, and my sister, when my brothers were born, I turned 4 5 days later, and my sister was 2.5. So lots of kids really close together. So we were close. We were close, and it was a good upbringing. I mean, I just unfortunately my dad had come from some pretty difficult circumstances, and so that wasn't ideal. And there were some issues that came up because of that, but otherwise, it was pretty typical. I learned to play the piano. I was in the band. I played the piano for the pop choir and things like that.
Really?
So yeah, a lot of fun.
Right on.
Yeah.
Very cool. Was it hard at times being the oldest? Because sometimes a lot is expected of the oldest, like be the example and
Absolutely.
show the kids the way.
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely felt that, and I think well, like I said, I turned 4 5 days after my twin brothers were born, and my parents are from the generation where the mom does everything, and so then that just transferred down to me. So I had to grow up pretty quick.
Yeah, you had to help out, right?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And then as a teenager, I went to working for my dad. He was an engineer, but he changed careers when I was in high school and became a State Farm insurance agent. Okay. And so I started working in his office when I was old enough, when I was 16. Actually, wow. I think I started when I was 14.
Right.
Filing papers and things like that.
Helping out around. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Very cool. So, as you grow up there, let's talk a little bit about what did high school look like for you, and what were some of maybe the things you had gone through during high school, good or bad, I guess.
High school was actually not too bad. I do remember feeling on the outside of things a lot. I actually wanted to graduate early. My parents weren't really for that, so I ended up taking like a half a load my senior year because I had enough credits. Right. So I was engaged in band for a short time, but then my attention went to choir and mostly playing the piano for choir. I wish that I had played basketball when I was in junior high and starting in high school. They asked me to join the team to try out, and I just didn't have the confidence to do it. And so that's really one of my regrets, is that I didn't do that. I really enjoy sports. I play competitive tennis now and things like that. So I wish that I had pursued that, but mostly it was music.
Yeah. So, but you were really confident when it came to being in the band and all that, correct?
Yeah.
It's interesting how we can be confident in one area and maybe not so much in another. Yeah. And I guess that's pretty typical of all of us growing up.
That's true. And my brothers were very athletic. They were both baseball players, and they played basketball, and they were, very athletic, very smart.
Right. So you, after you graduate from high school, what were the plans at that point? What were you going to do, and what did you do? So
when I graduated from high school, I then went to Brigham Young University here in Utah, in Provo. And I was there for a couple of years. And interestingly, what happened is I graduated from high school with honors. Okay. And then I came out to college, and every semester my grades got lower and lower and lower, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And I was exhibiting some strange behaviors and so forth. And really? My mom reached out to our doctor, who'd been my doctor since I was 2. Yeah. And she said, "Is she on drugs?" And my mom said, "I don't think so." But that's what they thought. So they brought me in, and I was 20 years old, and my blood pressure was 210/120. Oh, wow. And my doctor discovered that I had a thyroid issue. Okay. I had Graves' disease. My thyroid was 3 times the size it was supposed to be by the time they discovered it. And that's what had caused me to stop being able to concentrate. So that's why I wasn't able to concentrate in school and get things, and really accomplish anything in school at all. So I ended up having surgery. I ended up having emergency surgery, which was a story we won't go into, but I had emergency surgery, and a few months later, I went back to school. Because I had basically failed out of college, I had to go back to a junior college for a semester, got straight A's, came back to BYU, got, A's and B's, but I didn't finish my degree because of my illness. And then shortly after that, I married my high school sweetheart, who I didn't mention in my high school years, but we had started dating when we were 16, and he had gone on a service mission and came back, and we got married, and then that's when my college career basically ended, as I went to work full time and
married. And yep. And did he come out to Utah as well with you at that time as well? Okay.
Yeah, we were both out here at BYU, and then after he graduated, we went back to Florida, and we moved back to Florida, and that's where our 3 children were born. Were in Florida. Mm-hmm.
Right on. Yeah. So you're out of Florida, and so you have 3 kids. At this point, how old are you?
I am 26.
26.
26. Okay. And this is just about the time that my brother was not doing well.
Was this one of the twins?
This is one of the twins.
Okay.
Right. So I have one sister and then my 2 brothers. And one of my twin brothers, well, he's not my twin, one of my brothers, he was out here in Salt Lake working for a publishing company, and he had gotten married and they had one baby, and he just wasn't doing well. He'd had some issues before. He actually he was struggling. He was struggling with depression. We just didn't realize how serious it was because he was so far away from us at that point. And we were all living in Florida. The family was all living in Florida, and he's out in Salt Lake City.
So no one really knew what was going on for sure. Yeah.
And then there was a suicide attempt. And so my mom and my dad were out here for a while, but my mom was out here for quite a while helping him, and they had sought some treatment for him, outpatient treatment and so forth. And unfortunately, once the time had passed that where they were watching him closely and really being there with him, he attempted suicide again, and unfortunately he was successful this time. And he passed away at 22. He was almost 23. And so I immediately got on a flight and came out here to Salt Lake for a funeral, unfortunately. So it was pretty devastating.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, obviously very devastating for the entire family and those who knew your brother. Obviously he was struggling, was there any indications of what was going on, or was it still kind of an unknown, like what, to the family, I guess?
It's always easier to see on the backside of things, what's happening, what was happening, what the signs were and so forth. But this has been so many years ago, and it was before it was more openly talked about. And because of that, well, and just to back up a little bit, he was the fourth suicide in our family.
Really?
And it was one each generation. So my dad's brother had committed suicide when he was 17. My dad's father had died as an older man. And then I found out doing some research that my grandfather's uncle had also committed suicide back in like the 1920s.
Oh, really?
So I think when all this came up with my brother, and there was just a lot more, there's not as much as there is now, but a lot more information about mental health. And he was diagnosed as bipolar. And I think it started answering some questions about what had been going on in the family all these years.
Right.
So,
is that what led you to researching once this happened? You're like, what's going on here? And is that what led you to want to do that? A little
bit. But unfortunately, when my brother committed suicide, about the same time, my husband was going through some really difficult things. And life just kind of started falling apart almost immediately in our family. And he was involved in a lot of different things, and I won't go into all of that.
Sure, that's fine.
Because, but our marriage didn't survive. So we tried to save it for a couple of years and went through counseling and some different things. And even at one point he was experiencing he was gambling, and his family thought that he was possibly addicted to gambling, and he ended up in a facility for a few days, and there were a lot of other things going on. But anyway, the marriage didn't survive, and so we divorced just a couple years after my brother died. And so that became so much of my focus, was trying to save my marriage, trying to save my family. We had 3 young children. So when we finally did separate and divorce, our children were 6, 4, and 1.
Oh, wow.
So they were really young.
So that's tough at any age, but that's, younger they are, the tougher it is. And then, now you're this single mom with these kids. Obviously there's probably help there on both sides, but then also trying to deal with. So did it keep you from actually really grieving around your brother, or did you have a chance to do that?
I think I grieved both at the same time. I think it was very much a situation of grieving both at the same time. It was a difficult time, and I did have so much help. I had my family lived in town, my ex-husband's family lived in town, and interestingly, a year later I remarried. and his family all lived in town. So I was still working full time, and everyone was helping. And so we just had lots of family around helping.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my ex-husband left the country shortly after we separated. And so he left the country, so he wasn't around.
So you really were the single mom with...
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, wow. Well, luckily you had all the help too. I mean, it's still difficult, but it's nice to know that, that you had friends and probably family pitching in and that kind of thing.
There were so many miracles around that. It was really amazing to watch all the miracles that happened. Just even where I was working and the promotions that I got at this job where, I mean, it was pretty remarkable what happened.
It's like, it was like so crystal clear.
I was so taken care of. I was very taken care of.
Wow.
Yeah.
It tears me up to think about that, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I have this philosophy and belief that life happens for us, even the difficult things, because like you say, we can always look back and go, wow, look at this. This happened and this happened and this led to this and then this led to this. And so to hear you say that, it doesn't surprise me one bit, actually.
And I knew it when it was happening. I actually had gotten a couple of promotions at the job that I was at, and they ended up sending me to Las Vegas to research some changes that were happening. We were a durable medical equipment company, and so we provided durable medical equipment for nursing homes, for nursing home patients. So our payments were mostly coming from Medicare. Anyway, so they sent me to Las Vegas to figure out how to get paid. And I was pretty young and pretty inexperienced, and it felt like a huge weight. The first time I was traveling on my own, I didn't even have my own credit card because my divorce had just happened, and I had basically lost a lot of the financial that I had before. And so anyway, it was just one miracle after another. I went out to Las Vegas. I was able to find the answers that they were looking for, able to come back and deliver that. And I really saw it even at the time, but of course, looking back, it's even more obvious.
Wow. Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Just a little bit more about losing your brother. I mean, how did the family deal with it as a whole? I mean, like your parents and your other siblings.
It was really, really hard. I think it was, as a parent, it's so much different than it is as a sibling. Yeah. And I know that more now than I ever did before, but it was really difficult. And my parents have differing religious beliefs. My mother has always had a lot of faith, and she continues to. My dad never had that type of background and never experienced that. So I think I don't think he even knew what to do, or how to. And ultimately, my parents divorced a few years later. But it was really difficult. It was really difficult. And I was living in the same town with my mom and dad. And at the time, I think I was the only one living there that was actually in town. And so it was hard to watch. Yeah. And then, of course, my brother, who's my brother John was the one that passed away. My brother James, who was his twin, was particularly difficult for him to come to terms with.
Yeah, I can imagine losing your twin, because usually twins are really close their whole lives. And
they were so close, and they were so fun together because both of them have great sense of humor. And so they would bounce off of each other, and I still miss that to this day.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that and be willing to share with our listeners that. And, a lot of the listeners and the followers that I have been through similar things. And so I think it's good for them to kind of hear it, again.
And I'm going to be talking about what happened with my kids, but as I look back and I see the kind of support that I received compared to, I think my mom just felt really lonely. Yeah. And especially during that time, the stigma was even greater. Yeah. And I think as grievers, we do that to ourselves too. Like we pull back, and then we also feel like people kind of pull away because they don't know what to do, how to act, what to say. Yeah. So it's difficult. It's
like, because it's almost like no words can maybe do anything. And so that's why people kind of go, what do I even say?
Exactly.
Because it's not going to mean anything, really.
Exactly.
But it is nice to know people are there that care and that kind of thing. Well, Let's jump ahead a little bit here then. I mean, because I want to get into what happened to you. You lost 2 children, and maybe kind of, share with us up to that point and then go through that if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had 3 children from my first marriage, and like I said, we divorced, and I remarried a year later to a wonderful man who was a wonderful father to my 3 children.
Right.
And then we had 3 more children.
3 more, okay.
And we had moved away from Florida. Our 2 youngest were born actually in the Dallas area, and then we moved to Houston. And so we were living in Houston, and my family was still in Florida. My husband's family was living in North Carolina. His parents were living in North Carolina. Okay. And so we often would just jump in the car. When you have that many kids, you don't fly anywhere. You jump in the car and you just you make it work. You put the cooler in the car and you just go. And so we'd done that a ton.
Right.
And on Mother's Day weekend, it was Mother's Day 2007, I had my 3 youngest children with me, and we were making a cross-country trip like we'd done before. And we were traveling to North Carolina to visit my husband's parents.
Okay.
And we got to and we were having a great trip. It was, my son was 8, David, and Carrie was 10 at the time, and James was 12. So it was the three of them and myself. And we were traveling across the country. We got to the border of Alabama and Mississippi on Highway 20. And suddenly I woke up. I did not even remember even being tired, but all of a sudden I'm driving the car and I'm waking up and I find myself in the median.
Wow.
On the highway.
Yeah.
And as soon as I tried to drive back up onto the highway, the car started rolling. And it rolled and it rolled and it rolled. I don't even know how many times it rolled. We were driving in a SUV, and the car just started rolling. And we finally came to a stop upright, and I could hear my 12-year-old son, who was sitting next to me, crying. But I couldn't hear Carrie and David, who had been in the back seat.
They were in the back.
In fact, the last thing I remember Carrie saying to me was, "Mom, I love you. Happy Mother's Day."
Really?
Yeah. And then her brother was bugging her, so she'd moved over and put the seatbelt on the seat that was further away from him.
Right.
And unfortunately, those were the days when even when kids weren't wearing boosters or car seats at 8 and 10.
Right.
They were, Carrie was a tall girl, so she was anyway. I didn't hear them. I didn't hear them when the car stopped, and I actually lost my eyesight as the car was rolling. I think I must have hit my head or something, and I couldn't see right away, but I could hear James, and I was calling for Carrie and David. I couldn't hear them.
So you can remember rolling?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I just don't know how many times it rolled, and we ended up on the other side of the highway, and my eyesight started to come back, and then I can see all the shattered glass.
Right.
And I see people are starting to gather in this field on the side of the highway, and my kids, Carrie and David, had been thrown from the car. It's when I realized that they'd been thrown from the car because I couldn't hear them. And I saw, and it was so far off. It's like a dream. It's hard to even comprehend, but I could see them off. I mean, they had to have been 30 feet away or more.
Wow.
From the car, from where we landed. A gentleman walked up, and just these really good people.
Yeah.
He walked up, and immediately I was like, I need a phone. I need to call my husband. And I called Ron, who was so far away from us in Texas, and said, we've been in an accident.
Wow.
And I don't know if Carrie and David are going to make it. And ambulances started showing up, and I felt paralyzed. I was sitting in the car just kind of feeling paralyzed. I wasn't. I mean, I was okay, but physically, emotionally, and in every way, I just felt like I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. The sad part is that when we stopped rolling, and I heard my son next to me, and I'm calling for Carrie and David, and I didn't hear them. And I started yelling, I killed my children. I killed my children.
Oh, wow.
I was like so upset, obviously.
Yeah, right.
And to this day, I just feel so sad that my son was sitting in the car listening to that. It had to have been so traumatic for him in addition to everything else. But
right, to
hear
you
that anguish
in that state of mind saying those things. And wow.
Yeah. So the ambulance shows up, and they actually took Carrie and David to a hospital in Alabama, and they took James and I to a hospital in Mississippi. And it was Mother's Day, and James' leg was severely broken, and he needed emergency surgery. And amazingly, the doctor that was, I remember hearing an intern, or my husband told me that he heard the intern. It's all kind of fuzzy, but saying that he couldn't believe that Dr. Rush, it was actually Rush Memorial Hospital. Dr. Rush was there.
Really?
He was the one that had pioneered the procedure that my son needed. I mean, it was amazing.
Well, I was going to ask, why did they take you to separate hospitals? But maybe it was for that very reason. I mean, what a miracle that was.
Yeah, I don't totally know why, except for that. I think that they were smaller country hospitals, possibly, and maybe they just couldn't handle 4 emergency
that makes sense.
arrivals. So, but they put me on a striker board, and I was sitting on a striker board for hours, laying in the hospital, not knowing if Carrie and David were dead or alive.
Oh my goodness.
I knew, though, my heart knew that they probably didn't make it.
Yeah, because you knew.
And none of the hospital staff would tell me.
Yeah.
And we were so far away from everything, but I did have an aunt and uncle that lived just a few hours south of where we were. And so they drove up, and so they were the ones that had to come in and tell me that they didn't make it.
Wow.
Yeah.
At this point, had your husband made it there yet?
No.
Or so you hear the news, you're still by yourself, laying down.
Yeah, with my aunt and uncle,
goodness.
who I'm very close to. So
I can't even imagine that. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and Ron was finally able to make it there, and amazingly, the hospital had us in a room. So they put my son James and I in the same hospital room.
Okay.
So when he was recovering from his surgery, I had some shoulder injuries, and my wrist was broken, and some different things. But they put us in the same hospital room, and then the hospital room had like a lobby that was attached to it, like another room that was attached to it. And that's where all of our family and friends gathered. So I don't even remember how many people were there, but there was a ton of people.
Wow.
A lot of family and friends, an aunt that flew in from Salt Lake City, my aunt and uncle that had come up from where they lived in Mississippi, and my mom and dad, my sister, my mom were living in Nashville, so they drove down.
Right.
So just a ton. Friends flew in from Houston to support us. And so we held vigil there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I can't even imagine that. I mean, I have 4 kids of my own, and I wish I could say I understand what you went through, but I don't.
Well, I really didn't understand it until I was there.
Yeah. Well, so the aftermath of that, I mean, let's talk a little bit about how did you start moving forward at that point? I mean, you have to, because you have other kids and you're trying to, so talk about that just a little bit. And then I want to get into what you're doing now and how this led to what you're doing today and how you're giving back and helping other people, which is quite remarkable in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So we made our way back to Houston for the funeral. And, in some ways I felt almost lucky that I was physically injured, because it gave me a little more space to take care of myself and to just lay low a little bit. But I suffered from PTSD for about 3 years. Okay. After that, it was really difficult for me to drive a car at all for the first few months, and then slowly I started driving the car for short
difficult
trips.
In the sense of you didn't want to get in a car because of the traumatic part of it. Gotcha.
Oh, yeah, it was bad. Like I would just almost have a panic attack, getting in a car. Even riding with somebody was difficult.
I can imagine.
So that was really hard. And the PTSD I ended up going to a therapist for a couple of years trying to overcome the PTSD. But in the middle of all that, my depression got really bad. In fact, about 3 weeks after the accident, my husband was really insistent that we all go see somebody. So he took us to this therapist, and we all saw him for, one time.
Right. Yeah.
For whatever that's worth.
Right.
And there were some good things that came out of that. Like, one of the things that he told us was, don't be surprised if you have crazy thoughts during this time, because your brain is just trying to make sense of everything.
Yeah, right.
But unfortunately, the thing that he said that I latched onto that didn't end up being very helpful was happiness is a choice, and you get to choose whether or not you're happy. And so for the first little while, like, I was patient with myself.
Right.
But 6 months in, a year in, I started becoming really impatient with myself, and I'm not choosing happiness. So then on top of everything else, I was beating myself up, and I was trying to make sense of that. Like, how do I choose happiness right now? I don't even know how to do that. And it's just, you just find yourself in such a weird place. And I just became, my whole identity was wrapped around, I'm the mother who lost 2 children, and that's who I became for that time. And I just could not wrap my head around how to choose happiness. And then I just spiraled into this thing with, I don't know how to do this. I can't do this. And the depression got really, really bad.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah. I would imagine what, we call that cognitive dissonance, where you're like, I'm supposed to be choosing happiness, but why do I feel so depressed? And then it's like, what's wrong with me kind of thing. And so, I could see why that was such a tug of war for you, because you hadn't even processed through all of that traumatic event that you went through.
No.
I mean, and anyone listening to this would go, losing 2 children in the way that it happened. I mean, anyone can understand. You can't just all of a sudden, I'm going to be happy today, this very second. You've got to actually process through the hurt. And if you don't do that, then you're again, I can see why you were struggling. Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that my feelings about myself were just off the wall awful.
Right.
Because I was the one driving the car. Why didn't I know that I was tired? Why did I choose to go on this trip the way that I did? Why? All those questions come up, and I beat myself up terribly over that. And thank goodness for my husband, who was just wonderful. I mean, today I know that our marriage wouldn't have lasted if it hadn't been for him and his patience and his ability to just be there and to just sit through all of that. And I'm just amazed. I'm amazed that he was, he was able to do that. And never, ever, ever did I hear him say anything that even hinted that he blamed me.
Right.
Which is remarkable, because I don't know that I would have done the same. And I wonder sometimes if that's why I was the one driving the car, is because he was the one that was willing to be forgiving.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a blessing for you and your family. That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's just what a, gut wrencher to hear this. And, but I think what's even more remarkable is how you've gotten past this. I mean, I'm sure you're still dealing with it on certain levels for sure, but now you're doing something to give back. You have a podcast that you do. It's called Build a Life After Loss. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you also do, is it a website and a blog around around grieving and helping people get past that kind of thing?
Yes. So I have a website, buildalifeafterloss.com. We're also on Facebook by the same name. And,
great.
And I do, the podcast is specifically for mothers who have lost children, although I hear from people all the time that they listen to it, for other losses. But it's my journey, when my therapist finally said, "You're good," I was like, I don't feel good, and I spent the next 2 years trying to come up with another symptom or another illness that I could go back and see this therapist and, try to figure out what am I supposed to do next? And so that was kind of my thoughts when I started to get trained as a grief recovery specialist, as a life coach, is that, how do we go from here to there? And I think that our support needs to be equal to our challenge. And the other thing that I noticed as I started looking at things was that a lot of the messages to mothers who have lost children specifically is your life is over. You're always going to be grieving your child. It's every day is going to be painful. Every breath is painful. And unfortunately, that's the message that we're getting.
Right, yeah.
And yes, that's the way it is at the beginning, for sure.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's why a lot of times those messages are passed around, is because people put those messages out when they're at the beginning of their grief, and totally understandable. That's the way it feels. It feels like your life is over. But I think one of the things that really helped me, and I'm hoping to be that person for other people, is that I had gone through horrible losses before, not as great as this, and not as devastating, but I had gone through losses before, and I knew that how I felt then did not determine how I felt later.
Right.
And so I think, but I do, like you have this sign on your wall right now that says mindset is everything. So if as a mother who has had a child die thinks that they're never going to get over, not over, the terminology is lacking there. But if we think that we're always going to be in deep grief, then anytime we feel any type of happiness, anytime we feel any type of joy, we push it away because our thought pattern is, I must not love my child enough because I'm supposed to be in grief the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I've even heard people say, I don't deserve that.
Right.
Like, well, that feels so good. I'm happy. I shouldn't be happy. I should be sad still.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard, other people who've been through similar things have said that as well, where, I just don't feel like I deserve it. It's so uncomfortable to be happy. I'm just going to sit here because this is what it's going to be like for the rest of my life. And I'm glad you're pointing that out, because I know that that's just not the case. Like you said in the beginning, for sure, you're going to go through that 100%. But to know that you can get past that and not have to be grieving every single day for the rest of your life. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, because I think that what we want to be able to do is celebrate our children.
Right.
And we want to remember the happy memories. We want to be able to look back, and we still to this day love telling David stories, because my David was a character. Right. We homeschooled I didn't even bring that up, but we homeschooled for 15 years. And so when the kids passed away, we were there together every single day. I taught them. And so our lives changed dramatically overnight. Our two oldest daughters went off to college right after. Our daughter, our second oldest, was just graduating that month. Right. And so she went off to college. And so we went from a family of 8 at home to having 4 at home. And it was just so different. But, I'll just give you a classic David story. We were all sitting around the dining room table when he was 3 or 4, doing schoolwork, and he was upstairs playing. And next thing we know, my daughter Carrie looks up and says, "There's water dripping from the chandelier." So it was just like that all the time with him. He was into something. He was smashing banana on somebody's bed, or he was trying to climb up to the second story window, or whatever it was. He was a character, and sure. And we want to be able to still enjoy those memories. Right. And if all of our memories are around that last moment, or are around that last thing that happened, or what ifs and whys, certainly we have to come to terms with those at the beginning. Right. But over time, we can come to terms with those things. Yeah. We might not have all the answers. I still don't have all the answers. Right. But I've come to terms with it, and I've adjusted to the new reality, and now we can look back with fondness. And if our children were sitting in the room with us right now, what would they tell us? Right. They would say, live your life, enjoy your life.
I love that, Julie. I love that. And here's why I love that, because I work with a lot of clients who have lost loved ones and this and that. And I'll say the same thing. If they're sitting in the room right now, would they want you to be happy or sad? And without fail, they all say they'd want me to be happy. And I'm like, then let's honor them by giving them what they want. now at this point, now that you've grieved through it. And so that hits me so hard when you say that.
I probably got it from you.
I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. I probably got it from you.
But I just think let's honor our children in a way. And certainly we're going to feel that sadness and it's going to take time.
Yeah.
But time, and that's another thing that we hear in society that's not necessarily true, and is that time heals all wounds. It's what we do with the time that heals the wounds. It's what we do during that time.
I love that. Wow, that's a good way of looking at it, for sure. Well, so when did you decide after going through all of this, when you're like, okay, I'm at a point now where I actually want to give back. I want to help others who have gone through this. Was it a gradual thing, or did you all of a sudden wake up one day and go, you know what? I want to start making a difference in this area of grieving and helping others get past it.
Yeah. So I had found some things that had helped me in my journey. And in my first couple episodes of the podcast, I talk about like these 10 things that I felt like really helped me kind of move forward. I like that. But what happened was in 2012, I met a gentleman, much like yourself, who had gone through some difficult things and now was helping other people. And he learned about my story. We were at a lunch with a handful of other people, and he learned about my story. And afterwards, he walked up to me and he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're supposed to do something with this." And it like went straight to my heart. And I'd had inklings about things, but when he said that, it was like, there was no denying that it was true.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went on a search, and I actually enrolled to go back to college to get a degree in psychology and therapy. And it just did not feel right. And so I ended up not doing that. And I had a couple other experiences similar to that gentleman, and things just kind of started to take form. And yeah, so I went and I got certified as a grief recovery specialist, which I highly recommend to people. It's an action plan. Right. You know, it deals with the emotion, not just the intellectual, which is so often what we hear.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, that's amazing. I think it's amazing what you're doing. And, as I'm listening to your story, and we can go all the way back to, even when you lost your brother, and, and all of those trials, and then going through a divorce and all this stuff, and how it's almost kind of like prepared you to be in a position now to be able to sit across from someone and go, I get what you're going through.
Yeah.
And here's what I've done. And I think if you'll try these things, it'll be helpful because I'm doing them myself.
Right.
It's kind of, and that's why I always think life can happen for us in that way.
Absolutely. And I look at every experience I have had in my life, not just my losses, but other experiences that I've had that have all kind of come together to help me with this. Just even the technology of doing a podcast, but anyway, so it's just very like cool. Everything feels like it's come together for this moment and for doing this. And, I work with, I do support groups locally in the Salt Lake area for grief recovery. It's not just for mothers who've lost children. Like the Facebook page is just universal and so forth. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, if you could, give some advice to someone who's going to hear this and is listening to this right now, who's going through a really difficult time, they're grieving, they've lost a loved one, what's some advice that you could give them, and what direction could you point them in at this moment if they're feeling lost and not sure where to go?
Yeah, excellent. Well, I love the name of your podcast, Belief Cast, because that is what I would tell people, is to really think about, like, what do they believe? Yeah. If they can wrap their head around believing that there is recovery available, that makes a huge difference just right there. Because if we open our mind to recovery, if we open our mind to healing, then the resources will appear. They will be there. We will notice them. Yeah. If we close our mind off to the idea of healing, then those resources might be right in front of us and we're never even going to see them. We're never even going to notice them. Wow. So it all kind of starts with what is our thinking. And that's a lot of what I do with my clients is help them with their thought process. Like what are we thinking about this, and how can we make a couple of adjustments so that, we can open our mind and our heart to healing.
Very cool, man. Very well said. Very well said. Well, if someone wanted to reach out to you and they wanted to, talk to you more or get more information about what you do, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can email me at julie@buildalifeafterloss.com. Okay. I know it's long. buildalifeafterloss.com. So Julie at buildalifeafterloss.com.
Great.
That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. But if you go on the Facebook page, you message me there as well, and I answer pretty quickly there as well. So.
Yeah, and then you also have the website, buildalifeafterloss.com.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So check that out as well and get more information on what you do. And I've checked it out. It's a great website, and I really admire what you're doing and how you've handled all of this. I think if people could see that even though all you've been through and here you are, I mean, when you walked in, you're smiling, you're glowing, you have a great countenance about you.
Thank you.
You're very warm, safe. And it just shows that I get the feeling that you truly are healed in the sense that, you are enjoying happiness now in your life despite what you've been through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very
I've got
cool.
9 grandchildren now too. So
right on. That helps. Yes. I've got 1. So I'm trying to catch up with you eventually, but I can't thank you enough for being willing to come share your story. It was really inspiring, and I love what you do. I'm so glad you reached out, and I hope that that I guarantee you, I know I can't prove this, but you're going to help several people because of this story on this podcast today. And
thank you,
I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I love what you do. And
Thanks.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Well, there you go, listeners. Like I said, another amazing story from another amazing woman, Julie Cluff. And I just want to thank you, listeners, for all your support. Continue sharing this with people you know. And I can't thank you enough for allowing this to hit the airways in such a way that it's doing. And again, Veracity Networks, thank you for your sponsorship. And Julie, once again, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.